Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Elena Torres sat alone, spine straight, boots aligned with regulation precision. Her uniform sleeves were rolled to her elbows, forearms faintly bruised from days of close combat drills. Around her, the low hum of male voices filled the barracks room, laughter, clinking canteens, a few crude jokes thrown her way, none of which she acknowledged. She stared straight ahead. Fort Carson, Colorado, Advanced Combat Program, the place where the Army's best went to break their limits or to be broken by them. She was 24, 5'2", the smallest recruit in the program's history. They called her Princess. Not out of respect, but mockery. The nickname had spread like wildfire after the first week, when Sergeant Cooper had barked it during a drill. "Try not to cry, Princess. We're just warming up." The words had stuck. But so had something else, the calm in her reply. She hadn't said a thing. That silence unnerved them more than anger would have. Across the room, Sergeant Major Marcus Jackson entered, tall, broad, his every step commanding the air itself. A man carved from war, with two bronze stars and eyes that had seen too much. The laughter stopped like someone had flipped a switch. "At ease," Jackson ordered. Dozens of boots shifted, but his gaze found her first. The only woman in the row. The one he had tried to exclude from the program. He'd written in his report, too small for combat operations, liability in the field. And yet there she was standing before him, unbroken. "Welcome to the Advanced Combat Program," he began. His voice was low, even, steady, the kind that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. "If you think regular Army training was difficult, you're about to discover what difficult truly means." Elena didn't blink. Not when his words cut through the air. Not when the others shifted, casting sidelong glances in her direction. Jackson paced in front of them. "Out there," he said, pointing toward the mountains that framed the base, "the enemy doesn't care how strong you are, how fast you run, or what gender you checked on a form. They care about one thing: whether you live long enough to stop them." His boots stopped inches from her. He looked down at her, the smallest body in formation, eyes unwavering. "In all my years," Jackson said quietly, "I've never seen anyone your size make it into this program. That tells me one of two things. Either someone made a mistake, or you've got something special." He let the silence breathe before adding, "Time will tell which." He moved on. She exhaled, slow, measured. She'd heard worse, much worse. When the briefing ended, she found herself face to face with Sergeant Cooper, former Ranger, 4 combat deployments, scars across his jawline like lightning frozen in flesh. He studied her as if trying to solve a puzzle he didn't ask for. "Pair up for drills," he ordered. "Find someone of similar size." Nobody moved toward her. It wasn't subtle. They paired up instantly, in twos, in rows, until she stood alone in the center of the mat. Cooper sighed. "I need a volunteer to work with Torres." Silence. Then a hand rose. Specialist James Rodriguez, a lean boxer from Miami, former Golden Gloves champion. "I'll work with her, Sergeant." Cooper's eyebrow lifted. "You sure?" "Yes, Sergeant." They squared off. Cooper demonstrated the stance: wide base, solid core, and then circled Elena. "Show me yours, Torres." She adjusted. He frowned. "Too narrow, you'll get flattened." He placed a hand on her shoulder and pushed lightly. She stumbled half a step, then corrected her footing, knees soft, spine aligned. "Better," he said. Rodriguez front choke, controlled. Rodriguez lunged, hands out, slow and deliberate, but before he could tighten his grip, her palms moved. Quick, fluid. She slipped inside the attack, deflecting his arms, pressing into his elbows' nerve line. He winced involuntarily, his hand spasming open. Cooper blinked, again faster. Rodriguez came at her with full speed this time, and the same thing happened. She wasn't stronger, just precise. Cooper stepped in. Standard defense drill. I'll attack, watch carefully. He drew a training knife, rubber but convincing. He lunged fast. Alina shifted left, deflecting the slash, catching his wrist mid-motion, redirecting his arm down and away. He nodded slightly, again. He came faster, harder, this time breaking her grip, tapping her ribs with the blade. "Dead," he said flatly. "Your grip's too weak." They reset. Sweat dripped from her jawline, her breath calm. When he lunged again, she didn't resist, she moved with him. A seamless redirection of his weight, a subtle strike to the nerve just above his elbow. His hand spasmed, the knife dropped. Cooper stared down at it. "What was that?" he asked, shaking his numb fingers. "It's called the theta surac," she said quietly. "Targets nerve clusters. My grandmother taught me." Cooper's eyes narrowed. "Not standard protocol." "With respect, Sergeant," Alina said, meeting his gaze for the first time. "In real combat, protocol is whatever keeps you alive." The yard went silent. Cooper looked at her a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair point." When the break came, the others whispered. Some laughed, others watched her differently now, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. That night she sat on her bunk and video-called her grandmother. The old woman's face filled the screen, sharp eyes behind round glasses, white hair tied back in a bun. "How was training, Anak?" "Tiring," Alina said. "They're planning something for tomorrow, a combat simulation. Sergeant Cooper and 2 others, they're setting me up to fail." Her grandmother smiled. "Then he gives you a gift." Alina frowned. "A gift?" "He doesn't know it yet," Sophia said softly. "But when a man underestimates you, Anak, he hands you the advantage. Remember what I taught you." Alina closed her eyes. The space between heartbeats is where warriors live. Sophia nodded. "Find that space, own it. Nothing can touch you there." The next morning dawn came wrapped in fog, thick, silent, and cold. The training ground looked like a ghost town. Recruits stood ready, rifles slung, hearts pounding. Jackson's voice carried through the mist. "Today's exercise is urban combat simulation. Objective: infiltrate, retrieve red canister, and return. You will face live opposition, your instructors." Alina's name was called last. As others went, she waited, hours passing in silence, breath slow, heartbeat steady. When her turn finally came, she stepped to the entrance. Cooper stood at the doorway, arms crossed. "Your opponents are me, Williams, and Brooks," he said. "We're cleared for maximum pressure. Try not to cry, Princess." For the first time she smiled, just a hint. "Wouldn't dream of it, Sergeant." Inside, the corridors were dim, walls pulsing with echoes of gunfire from hidden speakers. Smoke machines filled the air. Her footsteps were near silent, each one deliberate. She trained for this. Years before the Army, before Colorado, before the skepticism. In a backyard in San Antonio, under the burning Texas sun, with her grandmother guiding her hand through each motion of pencak silat. The first opponent came fast, one of the instructors in padded gear. She dropped him in seconds. A sweep, a pivot, an armbar, no hesitation. 2 more appeared down the hallway. She could hear the echo of boots behind her, calculated, closing in. This was the ambush. Williams came from the left, Brooks from the right. She didn't retreat. She moved fast, not away but through. She maneuvered so that Brooks was caught in Williams' line. Williams hesitated for a fraction of a second, enough. She parried, redirected, pivoted, and their momentum collided. Both men stumbled off balance. That's when Cooper appeared at the far end, steady, focused, assessing. He advanced, calm as a blade. "Good move," he said, "but this isn't over." "No, Sergeant," she breathed, lowering her stance. "It is." He attacked, precise, relentless. The exchange became a dance of control, counter, deflection. No wasted movement, no theatrics. She absorbed his strength, redirected his energy until finally he overextended. She seized the instant wrist, elbow pivot and dropped him to a knee. He broke free and lunged again. She slipped past him, sprinted toward the exit corridor, red canister clutched to her chest. Behind her, Cooper's voice cut through the din. Don't let her reach the exit. Another figure moved to block her. Williams again, stubborn, desperate. This time she didn't hesitate. One strike, one twist, and he was down, air punched from his lungs. 9 minutes, 18 seconds later, she emerged from the fog, chest heaving, canister in hand. The crowd was silent. Jackson stepped forward, expression unreadable. Mission complete, time. A nearby instructor checked his stopwatch. 9:18, Sergeant Major. A murmur rippled through the ranks, fastest of the day. Jackson nodded slowly, well done. She didn't smile, didn't need to. As she passed Cooper, he caught her eye. For the first time, there was something in his gaze that hadn't been there before. Respect. She returned to her bunk that night, body aching, mind quiet. She thought of Sophia's words, find the space between heartbeats. That's where she lived now. Between exhaustion and triumph. Between being doubted and proving them wrong. Between silence and legacy. And though no one said it aloud, they all felt it. The princess wasn't crying. She was rising. Why was her name the only one written in red? The roster for the final trial hung outside the mess hall. Dozens of recruits crowded around it, tracing fingers over printed names. Every candidate's assignment was marked in black ink, except hers. TORRES, ELENA Circle Combat, 7 opponents. She stared at it motionless. 7. No one got 7. The highest before her was 5. And even that had ended in blood. Behind her, the whispers began. They're setting her up. She's gonna get folded in half. Lucky if she makes it past 2. Elena walked away before their words could become laughter. The wind bit hard across the Fort Carson yard. The mountains loomed in the distance, capped in white, cold, indifferent, ancient. She stood alone in the open field, staring at the horizon, arms crossed, breathing steady. She had less than 24 hours to prepare for what would likely define, or end, her military future. But what haunted her wasn't fear of defeat. It was the thought of her grandmother's face, not disappointed but worried. Sophia Torres was a woman who had fought for her people in the jungles of Indonesia, resistance fighter, healer, mother. She had survived wars that didn't even make it into history books. And still, when she saw her granddaughter standing in army fatigues, she had said softly, "War doesn't test your body, Anak, it tests your soul." Elena now understood what she meant. As night fell, she sat in her bunk with her journal, the one she never showed anyone. On its first page, years earlier, she had written a single line. To be underestimated is to be invisible until it's too late. She ran her fingers over those words, eyes tired, muscles trembling. The silence of the barracks was filled with the occasional snore, the hum of ventilation, the faint tapping of someone's restless foot. Around her, every man in this program had been told he was elite, the best, the future of the Army's close-quarters combat division. And then there was her, the diversity experiment. That's what she overheard one night when 2 recruits thought she was asleep. Jackson's got orders to include a female in the lineup, one had whispered. PR optics won't last long. She had rolled over quietly and smiled into the darkness. Let them think that. Now, hours before the fight, she whispered to herself, they don't know who they're really fighting. Morning came early, the kind of cold that burned your lungs on the first inhale. She stood in formation, her breath visible in the air, waiting for Jackson's arrival. The circle, painted stark white, lay ahead on the concrete training yard. 7 men would enter that ring with her, one after another, until she fell or they all did. She flexed her hands inside her gloves, feeling every joint protest. Weeks of training, bruises on bruises, fingers raw from hours of grappling drills. Every movement carried a dull ache that no medic could treat. But the body wasn't what she was protecting anymore. Jackson stepped into the center, his voice carrying authority that silenced even the wind. Circle combat, he began, isn't about strength. It's about survival. It's about what happens when your body says no and your will says keep moving. He looked directly at her as he continued. Each of you will fight until you are defeated or you've faced all challengers. No breaks, no mercy. He nodded to the list in his hand. Tours, you're last on rotation. A few recruits muttered something under their breath. Jackson heard it but didn't react. He just handed the clipboard to his aide, then looked back at Alina. 7 opponents, he said simply. That's never been done before. Yes, Sergeant Major. Why do you think I assigned you 7? Alina hesitated. To test me, Sergeant Major. Jackson's tone stayed calm. No, because you're the only one I trust not to quit. She blinked, uncertain if she'd heard right. Every soldier here thinks strength is measured by weight, Jackson said. But strength, he tapped his temple, starts here. You've got something they don't understand yet. Let's see if they can learn. He turned away before she could respond. By noon, the yard was crowded. Instructors lined one side, recruits on the other. Even a few officers from other divisions had come to watch. Cooper stood near the circle, arms crossed, jaw set, eyes unreadable. Alina, he said quietly as she approached, you know I'll be in there. I know. You'll have to hurt me to win. I know that too. He gave a brief, approving nod. Then don't hold back. The whistle blew. Her first opponent stepped in, Brooks, 6'3", built like a wall, former Marine, confident, aggressive, with something to prove. They squared off, the princess against the tank. He lunged. She deflected, minimal movement, maximum control. Brooks grunted, pressed harder, tried to overwhelm her with pure mass. Her feet slid, her body bent, then she turned that momentum into his undoing. A sweep, a pivot. He hit the ground hard. Her knee pressed against his shoulder blade before he could breathe. Tap, Jackson barked. Brooks slapped the mat. She released him and stepped back. Next. Williams entered next, faster, sharper, technical. He didn't underestimate her. He'd seen what she did to Brooks. His strikes were clean, calculated. He wanted precision to crush her improvisation. Alina mirrored his movements, counter for counter, each strike absorbed, redirected, turned into rhythm. It became a conversation without words, an exchange of wills. Her lungs burned, her arms ached, but her mind was still. When he feinted right and committed left, she was already moving. Her shoulder met his ribs, her legs tangled his balance, and he hit the floor. 2 down. The recruits watching began to murmur. The tone had changed, not laughter but disbelief. Next. And then Cooper stepped forward. No noise, no taunt. Just calm. This was the fight that mattered. He circled her slowly. You've come a long way, Tours. She didn't answer. Her body moved instinctively, low stance, centered gravity, open palms. The techniques Sophia had drilled into her bones. When Jackson signaled, Cooper moved, not reckless, not emotional, but perfectly disciplined. Each strike measured, each feint controlled. She barely blocked the first 2 combinations. His precision was surgical. She felt herself falling behind, breath shortening. The crowd faded, the noise dimmed. All she could hear was her heartbeat. The space between heartbeats. She remembered she found it. On Cooper's next strike, she moved inside the attack instead of away from it. The risk was immense, a fraction of an inch off and she'd be down. But she wasn't off. Her left hand caught his forearm, her right redirected his elbow, her knee swept his stance. His weight shifted. Momentum redirected. He hit the ground before he realized it. Gasps echoed through the formation. Jackson's voice cut through the tension. 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, Cooper out. Alina stepped back, chest rising and falling, arms trembling but steady. Cooper looked up at her, breathing hard, and smiled faintly. A soldier's nod. Respect finally earned. Next, Jackson called. By the time the sixth opponent fell, her body was a storm of pain. Her muscles screamed with every movement. Her ribs burned where one of William's elbows had landed earlier. Her left eye was swelling. Blood tasted metallic at the back of her throat. The last opponent entered, Davis, youngest of them all, 22, but built like a tank. Adrenaline carried him forward. He charged without caution, trying to overwhelm what was left of her endurance. He didn't understand. Her endurance wasn't in her body anymore. It was in her heart. He swung wide. She slipped under. A strike to his throat, a pivot, a trip. He went down. She moved to secure the hold, but he twisted free, elbow clipping her cheekbone. The world flashed white. She staggered, blinked, reset. He came again, wild, furious. She sidestepped, redirected, used his momentum against him. This time, when he hit the ground, he stayed there. Jackson raised his hand. End. The yard erupted, not in cheers, but in stunned silence. 7 men, 7 victories. Record shattered. Alina stood, swaying slightly, blood dripping from a cut on her lip. She turned to Jackson, waiting for dismissal. He stepped forward, voice low but carrying through the yard. In 30 years, he said, I've never seen anyone finish a full 7. He paused, then looked around at the men surrounding her. You all called her princess. Maybe you should start calling her what she is. Silence. Then Cooper said it quietly, just loud enough for others to hear. Ranger. The word hung in the air, heavy and earned. That night, Alina sat outside the barracks, cold wind brushing against her bandaged face. Her knuckles throbbed. Her eyes stung. But her mind was quiet, the kind of silence only found after giving everything you have. She pulled out her phone, called Sophia. The old woman's face appeared, eyes glistening. I saw the footage, she said softly. You did well, Anak. Alina smiled faintly. I'm sore. Sophia chuckled. Good, pain is a teacher, not an enemy. What did you learn? Alina looked out at the stars, her voice barely above a whisper. That sometimes strength isn't what you show, it's what you refuse to give up. Her grandmother nodded. And what did they call you after? Alina hesitated, then said quietly, Ranger. Sophia's eyes softened with pride. Then the world finally sees what I've known all along. They sat in silence for a while, 2 generations connected by courage, one forged in jungles, the other in deserts and training yards. Both understood the same truth. That dignity doesn't need to speak. It simply acts. And sometimes, the quietest fighter leaves the loudest echo. How do you return to silence after the sound of victory? For 3 days after the circle combat, Fort Carson changed. The same recruits who used to laugh when she entered the room now stopped talking when she passed. Some nodded, some still looked away. But none of them called her princess anymore. Alina didn't celebrate. She trained. The bruises on her arms turned violet, then yellow. Her ribs ached when she breathed too deeply. But the pain grounded her, proof of what she'd endured, a language her body understood better than words. Every morning, she ran the perimeter of the base before sunrise, the sky still dark and cold. Her boots struck pavement in rhythm with her heartbeat. The space between heartbeats is where warriors live, her grandmother's voice reminded her. She ran until the cold burned out of her lungs, until she could think clearly again. Because victory brought its own kind of burden, the one that asked, what now? Cooper found her on the 4th morning. She was in the outdoor ring, practicing alone, fluid strikes, seamless transitions, her shadow cutting against the concrete in the dawn light. He stood quietly watching. When she noticed him, she didn't stop. Couldn't sleep, he asked finally. Didn't want to, she said. Cooper walked closer, his breath fogging in the cold. You made history last week. 7 opponents. That's not something anyone forgets. I didn't do it to be remembered, Elena replied softly. Then why? She lowered her stance, letting silence answer first. Then, because they needed to see that strength doesn't always look the same. He nodded slowly. They saw it, we all did. For a long moment they stood without words, 2 soldiers bound by respect, separated by experience. Then Cooper said quietly, Jackson's recommending you for the new close quarters program. Instructor candidacy. Elena blinked. Instructor. You've proven something no manual ever could. The Army's finally taking notice. She didn't respond right away. Part of her was proud, another part terrified. Instructor meant leadership, scrutiny, expectation. It meant passing on what she had learned to those who might never understand where it truly came from. Do I have a choice? She asked. Cooper smiled faintly. You've always had one. That's what makes you dangerous. Later that day, Jackson summoned her to his office. His walls were lined with framed commendations and photos of battlefields, not of victory, but of endurance. In every photo, his face was the same, unflinching. He gestured for her to sit. You know why you're here. Yes, Sergeant Major. You've done what none of my recruits have ever done. You didn't just fight, you adapted. You used something beyond our system, something older. He leaned forward. I want to study it. Elena hesitated. It's called Penkek Salat, my grandmother taught me. Jackson nodded slowly. Good, because if it can help our soldiers survive, it belongs here too. She frowned. With respect, Sergeant Major, it doesn't belong to the Army. It belongs to the people who protected it, to her. Jackson met her eyes. Then honor her by teaching it right. The simplicity of that answer disarmed her. He continued, we'll begin with a pilot course, small group, mixed ranks. You'll assist Cooper in developing a hybrid curriculum. Your knowledge, his structure. Understood? Yes, Sergeant Major. Good, Jackson leaned back. And tours? Yes, sir. I was wrong about you. She didn't know what to say. So she just nodded. The following week, her new journey began. But instead of combat, it was observation, learning to teach. She stood beside Cooper as recruits trained, demonstrating techniques they once called unconventional. Now, they studied her every move like scripture. At first, she felt exposed, 1,000 eyes on her, each searching for weakness. But she remembered Sophia's words, being underestimated is an advantage. Being respected is a responsibility. She carried both with quiet grace. During one session, Cooper asked her to demonstrate a disarm technique. Rodriguez, the boxer who had once volunteered to spar with her, stepped forward again, smiling sheepishly. Guess we're back where we started. Try not to cry this time, she teased softly. Laughter rippled through the room, warm, not mocking. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Rodriguez lunged, and she flowed around him effortlessly, deflecting, controlling, redirecting. The recruits watched in stunned silence. When Cooper called halt, he addressed the class. What you just saw isn't magic. It's not about muscle. It's about mastery, the kind that comes from humility and repetition. That's what wins fights. His gaze flicked to her briefly. Torres understands that better than most of us. She felt the weight of his words, and something inside her shifted, not pride exactly, but acceptance. That night she called Sophia again. The old woman's face appeared on the small screen, wrapped in warm lamplight. Behind her, the familiar shelves of books and framed photos, her late husband, her younger self in uniform, black and white memories of resistance. I heard you've become a teacher, Sophia said, eyes twinkling. An assistant, Elena corrected. Same thing, you pass knowledge to others, that's teaching. How does it feel? Alina hesitated. Strange, they listen now, but it's not the kind of respect I expected. Respect that is earned is quiet, Sophia said. It doesn't bow, it doesn't shout, it watches. Alina smiled faintly. You always make it sound simple. It's not, her grandmother replied, but neither is war. They fell into silence, the kind that only exists between those who truly understand each other. Sophia finally added, Do you miss the fight? Alina looked out her barracks window. The mountains were dark silhouettes under the moon. No, the fight is still here, she said softly, tapping her chest. It just looks different now. Weeks turned into months. The pilot program expanded. Soldiers from other branches arrived, Rangers, Marines, even Air Force operators, each curious about the tour's method. Cooper structured the curriculum. Alina refined it. Together, they built something new, modern training fused with ancestral wisdom. And with it came skepticism. Some called it a gimmick. Some called it un-American. But results silenced criticism faster than argument ever could. Recruits who practiced her techniques showed measurable improvements in endurance, balance, and control. Injuries decreased, efficiency rose, and slowly the mockery faded, replaced by quiet admiration. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal session, Cooper approached her at the edge of the yard. You ever wonder why you fight the way you do? He asked. Alina thought about it. Because I had to. Not anymore, he said. Now you fight because others need to learn how to. She looked at him, then away. I'm not sure I'm ready to carry that. You already are, he said simply. The question is whether you'll accept it. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked to the edge of the base where the concrete ended and the wilderness began. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of pine and snow. The sky stretched endlessly above her, 1,000 stars burning cold. She thought of her grandmother, of a life forged through hardship, survival, and sacrifice, of how Sophia had fought so her children and grandchildren could stand free. And now here she was, the living continuation of that legacy, training soldiers to protect lives she'd never meet, in battles she'd never fight. The thought humbled her. She closed her eyes and whispered into the wind. I hope I'm doing this right, Lola. Somewhere in the quiet, it felt like an answer came, not in words, but in the warmth that filled her chest. The next morning, she walked into the training yard before anyone else. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky in soft gold. She stood in the center of the circle, the same one where she had faced 7 men and the weight of every doubt she'd ever carried. Now it was empty, peaceful. She went through her movements slowly, not fighting, not proving, just being. Every strike, every shift, every controlled breath was a memory, a promise, a prayer. For Sophia, for those who'd come before, for those who'd come next. When she finished, she stood still, palms open, breathing the cold air in steady rhythm. Behind her, Cooper's voice broke the silence. You planning to start without me? She turned, smiling faintly. You're late, Sergeant. I let you have the first round. He joined her in the circle, mirroring her stance. Together, they moved through the sequences, student and mentor, warrior and witness. It was less a fight than a conversation of timing, balance, trust. As they finished, Cooper rested his hands on his knees, breathing hard. You know, he said, the next batch of recruits is going to call you something else. Another nickname, she asked. He nodded, not princess, not recruit. She raised an eyebrow, then what? He straightened, gaze steady, ma'am. That night she sat on her bunk, flipping through her grandmother's old notebook, filled with fading ink, sketches of combat stances and words written in 2 languages. On the last page, Sophia had written, Steel must pass through fire to gain its strength, so must we. Alina closed the book and smiled. She finally understood. Strength wasn't what she'd gained from surviving 7 fights. It was what she'd learned to carry after. And in that quiet realization she found peace, not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of it. She looked out the window one last time before turning off the light. The stars were out again, silent witnesses to everything she'd endured. Tomorrow would bring new soldiers, new doubts, new lessons. But tonight, just tonight, she allowed herself to rest. Because warriors don't live in the noise of battle. They live in the stillness that follows. The space between heartbeats. Where silence becomes strength. Where legacy becomes life. Why did the colonel ask for her by name? Alina Torres stood outside the operations building, early morning frost painting the windows white. The air was still, brittle. Every sound, the crunch of gravel, the hum of distant engines seemed sharper in the cold. Inside, behind a closed door, a meeting was waiting for her. Not a training session. Not a debrief. Something else. She adjusted her uniform, tugged her sleeves straight and stepped in. Colonel Andrews was seated behind the long metal desk, silver-haired, posture perfect, reputation sharper than the medals on his chest. Beside him sat Sergeant Major Jackson and Sergeant Cooper, both silent. Three men who had shaped her journey in different ways. Three pairs of eyes that saw her differently. Lieutenant Torres, the colonel began, her new rank still sounded strange when others said it. I've read your file. Impressive record, exceptional performance. And now this new hand-to-hand curriculum that's making noise up the chain. Yes, sir. He studied her. You understand the position you're in. I believe so, sir. No, Andrews said. You don't. You're not just a soldier anymore. You're an example. The Pentagon's watching this program closely. Some think it's revolutionary. Others think it's a publicity stunt. My job is to find out which. She stood straighter. Understood, sir. You'll be leading the next combat evaluation, he continued. Live scenario, mixed service operators. You'll run it, command it, and be judged by its outcome. Her chest tightened. A live simulation, sir. What parameters? You'll find out soon enough. Andrews leaned forward. You asked to prove that your method works. This is your chance. Jackson spoke up quietly. Colonel, with respect, the integration program is still early. That's why we're testing it, Andrews interrupted. His eyes didn't leave Alina. You've broken records, Lieutenant. Let's see if you can build something lasting. He stood, ending the meeting. You start tomorrow, dismissed. Outside, the winter wind cut against her face. Cooper followed her out, hands in his pockets. Guess you're the star pupil now, he said. Feels more like a target. He smiled faintly. Same thing in this line of work. She looked out across the parade ground, squads moving in formation, the rhythmic call of cadence echoing through the cold air. If this fails, they'll kill the program. And if it works, Cooper said, they'll try to take it from you. Alina exhaled slowly. Then I'll just have to make it undeniable. That night she sat alone in her quarters, laptop open, camera on. Her grandmother's face filled the screen again, smaller now, thinner, but the eyes still sharp. You look tired, Anak, Sophia said softly. They're sending me into evaluation training, mixed units. I'll be leading it. Sophia smiled faintly. You lead every time you act with purpose. The uniform only makes it official. It's different this time, Alina admitted. I'll have Marines, Air Force, Rangers, men who think I don't belong. They'll follow orders, but not me. Then don't command their obedience, Sophia said. Earn their faith. Alina frowned. Faith. Sophia nodded. A soldier can follow anyone's orders, but they'll only fight for someone they believe in. Make them see why you stand where you stand. Her voice softened. Remember, leadership isn't about shouting loudest. It's about standing still when others panic. Alina smiled faintly. I'll try, Lola. No, Sophia said gently. You'll do. The next morning, she met her team in the simulation yard. 10 soldiers, mixed branches. each hand-picked for excellence and ego in equal measure. The Marines stood together, broad-shouldered, skeptical. The Air Force operators exchanged amused looks. The Rangers stayed silent but assessing. Every one of them looked at her and saw a question mark. "Listen up," she began. Her voice was calm, deliberate, controlled. "This evaluation isn't about rank or bragging rights. It's about survival. You follow my lead, we complete the mission. You don't, we fail. Simple as that." A Marine smirked. "Ma'am, no offense, but we've been through plenty of survival drills. What's special about this one?" Alina met his eyes. "This one fights back." That shut him up. She outlined the scenario. Simulated hostage rescue, multi-floor complex, unpredictable enemy positions. Live opposition, instructors, armed with training rifles and tactical gear. Every decision would be recorded, evaluated, dissected. Their goal, retrieve the hostage and exfil without casualties. She finished her briefing. Questions. Silence. Then a ranger in the back, quiet, older, said, "What's your call sign, ma'am?" She thought for a second, then answered, "Echo 1." He nodded, understood, Echo 1. The respect in his tone was subtle but real. The operation began at 900. The building was cold concrete and steel. An abandoned munitions warehouse turned into a labyrinth of corridors and blind corners. Artificial smoke filled the air, lights flickering. The soundtrack of chaos, distant gunfire, alarms, shouted commands played through hidden speakers. Alina led from the front, moving with silent precision, signaling her team through hand motions instead of words. The Marines followed reluctantly at first, their confidence bleeding into caution as the environment closed around them. Then came the first contact. Two opposition soldiers emerged from a doorway. Before anyone could react, Alina was already moving, disarming the first with a fluid motion, using his momentum to drop the second. Her team froze, watching her execute moves that didn't look Army standard, efficient, almost poetic. When she turned to them, her voice was steady. "Move, don't watch me, watch your sectors." Something shifted then, a small fracture in their skepticism. They advanced. Through corridors, stairwells, smoke. Each engagement was faster, cleaner. Her team began adapting not to her commands but to her rhythm. The Rangers caught on first, then the Marines. When the next ambush came, they moved like a unit. By the time they reached the top floor, the enemy was waiting, instructors with rifles, covering the room where the hostage was held. "Split formation," she ordered. "Flank left and right, I'll draw fire." "Ma'am, that's suicide," one of the Marines whispered. She glanced at him. "Only if you're slow." She kicked the door open and moved before the instructors could adjust, rolling low, sliding behind cover. The rest of the team burst through on her cue. Smoke filled the room. Shouts, gunfire, controlled chaos. Seconds later, it was over. Objective secured. Mission complete. Elapsed time, 8 minutes 47 seconds. No simulated casualties. When they exited the building, Colonel Andrews was waiting on the observation deck, flanked by other officers. Jackson stood beside him, expression unreadable. Alina saluted. "Mission complete, sir." Andrews looked down at the data tablet in his hand. "Fastest completion of this course on record," he said slowly. "0 casualties, unprecedented." He studied her, then the soldiers behind her, their faces streaked with sweat and disbelief. "I assume they followed your lead." "They followed the plan, sir." He nodded slightly. "And who made the plan?" Alina didn't answer. She didn't need to. Andrews closed the tablet. "Congratulations, Lieutenant. You just gave the Pentagon its headline." He turned to Jackson. "Start drafting the report." Then he walked away. After the debrief, her team approached her one by one. The same Marine who had challenged her at the start extended his hand. "Ma'am," he said quietly, Next time you run something like that, I want in. She shook his hand. Next time you won't need me. He looked confused. What do you mean? Because you already know how. He stared at her for a moment, then nodded. Respect, ma'am. When they were gone, Cooper joined her, leaning against the railing overlooking the yard. You realize what you just did? He asked. Passed an evaluation, she said. He shook his head. You changed minds, that's harder. Alina didn't answer. She just looked out at the mountains again, the same peaks she'd stared at on her first day, when the nickname Princess had followed her like a shadow. Funny, she said quietly. It doesn't feel like victory. What does it feel like? Responsibility, she said. That evening, she received an encrypted message from the colonel's office. Subject: Presentation Request, Washington, D.C. Content: Demonstrate CQC integration program at the Pentagon in 30 days. She read it twice. The weight of it settled in. She was no longer just representing herself. She was carrying her grandmother's legacy, her mentor's faith, and the quiet proof that strength wasn't always loud. For a long moment, she just sat there, the glow of her monitor reflecting in her tired eyes. Then she reached for her phone and called home. When Sophia answered, Alina didn't speak right away. The old woman smiled gently. What is it, Anak? They're sending me to Washington, Alina said. They want me to present the program. Sophia's smile deepened, so the circle widens. I'm scared, Alina admitted softly. Good, Sophia said. It means you still understand what's at stake. I don't know what to say to them. Sophia leaned closer to the camera. You don't have to say much. Just show them the truth, that the smallest flame can still light the darkest room. Alina looked down, voice trembling. What if they laugh again? Then let them, her grandmother said, eyes fierce. You've survived worse. They sat there in silence, separated by continents, connected by everything else. The next morning, she returned to the training yard before sunrise. The frost was thick on the ground, the air sharp in her lungs. She stood in the center of the circle again, her circle, and whispered softly to the wind. For every time they doubted me, for every woman who will come after, for every warrior who learned to stand. Then she began to move. Slow, deliberate, graceful. Each strike carried memory. Each breath purpose. And as the sun broke over the horizon, turning the mountains gold, the circle of frost around her melted not by heat, but by movement. The world hadn't changed, but she had. When Cooper arrived minutes later, he stopped at the edge of the yard, watching her in silence. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. When she finally noticed him, she smiled faintly. You're early, Sergeant. Didn't want to miss history twice. She nodded toward the distant horizon, where the sunlight met the snow-covered peaks. Do you think they'll understand it, what this really means? Cooper shrugged. Maybe not, but they'll feel it, and sometimes that's enough. Alina looked at the circle beneath her boots, the same white line that had once been a boundary. Now it was a beginning. Because strength, she realized, was never about how hard you hit. It was how deeply you stood. How long you held your ground when no one believed in you. And sometimes, the quietest soldiers changed the world not by shouting, but by standing still and letting truth speak through action. Why did the applause sound so hollow? The Pentagon auditorium was full, brass, analysts, representatives from every branch. Rows of uniforms, medals catching the light. The kind of audience where silence meant judgment and approval was a weapon. At the podium, Lieutenant Alina Torres stood still, hands at her sides, jaw set, her uniform crisp, her shoulders squared. She'd been in firefights that felt quieter than this room. Behind her, a large screen projected slides from the Fort Carson combat program. Words like integration, innovation, and resilience scrolled past in government font. Her demonstration footage played, her 7-fight sequence, slowed down and analyzed frame by frame. Each strike dissected, each movement studied by people who had never thrown a punch. "As you can see," said Colonel Andrews, addressing the audience, "Lieutenant Torr's performance has drawn interest from across the department. The question before us is whether her methodology can scale." He turned toward her, a small, sharp smile. "Lieutenant, would you care to elaborate?" Elena stepped forward, her voice calm, steady. "Sir, what we're teaching isn't new. It's old. Older than any modern doctrine. It's survival refined by necessity. What makes it effective isn't the technique, it's the mindset behind it." A general near the front raised an eyebrow. "Mindset?" "Yes, sir, discipline under pressure, adaptability, awareness, strength through control, not aggression." A low murmur rippled through the room. Someone chuckled under their breath, a sound she'd heard before in different uniforms. "Lieutenant," another officer said, leaning forward, "you're suggesting we replace Army combatives with cultural martial arts." She met his gaze evenly. "No, sir, I'm suggesting we expand what we define as strength." The room fell silent again, a different kind of silence, sharper, heavier. Andrews cut in. "Very well, Lieutenant. We'll see how it performs under scrutiny. Tomorrow, 900 hours demonstration in the training complex. Mixed branch observers. You'll lead the session yourself." He closed the folder on the table. "Dismissed." Outside, the winter rain fell in cold sheets. The marble steps of the Pentagon gleamed like mirrors. Elena walked down them slowly, her breath forming faint clouds in the air. She'd spent years proving herself in combat, but here, in this city of quiet power, she felt smaller than she had since day one. Cooper met her at the curb, coffee in hand. He'd flown in overnight, unshaven, jacket wrinkled. "You survived the sharks?" he asked. "They smelled blood," she said dryly. He smiled. "That means they're interested." She shook her head. "They don't want to learn, they want to test me until I break." "Then don't break," he said simply. "You're not here to impress them, Tors. You're here to remind them what resilience looks like." She looked up at him. "You came all this way just to say that." He shrugged. "Couldn't let you fight this one alone." The next morning, the Pentagon training facility buzzed with restrained curiosity. Rows of chairs lined the observation deck. Cameras were mounted in every corner. The audience wasn't soldiers this time. It was policymakers, strategists, contractors, people who measured combat in numbers, not blood. Elena's demonstration team was assembled, 10 soldiers from different branches. Some familiar faces from Fort Carson, others new and skeptical. Colonel Andrews stood beside her. "You have 40 minutes, Lieutenant. Show them why this matters." "Yes, sir." As she stepped onto the mat, her heart beat slow, deliberate. The soldiers formed a semicircle before her, some grinning, some tense. She began softly. "Before we start, I want to ask one question." They waited. "What do you do when the plan fails?" A Marine smirked. "Make a new one." She nodded. "And if that one fails?" "Adapt," someone muttered. She smiled faintly. "Exactly. What I'm about to show you isn't about perfection. It's about adaptation, about turning disadvantage into opportunity." Then she called out. Sergeant Reyes stepped forward. He did, tall, confident, built like a statue. "Ma'am." "Attack," she said simply. He frowned. "Permission to go full speed." "Granted." He lunged. The room held its breath. What followed wasn't spectacle, it was fluid motion. She evaded, redirected, disarmed, all within seconds. He hit the mat, controlled but unharmed. Her movements weren't showy. They were quiet, efficient, survival in motion. Another volunteer stepped forward. Then another. Each time she adjusted, adapted, showing variations that flowed like water. Different branches, different styles, all turned against themselves through leverage and timing. Minutes passed and something shifted. The smirks disappeared. The observers leaned forward. Then Andrew spoke. Impressive, but can your methods hold under chaos? He gestured to the control booth. Activate simulation. The lights dimmed. Sirens wailed. Loudspeakers blasted combat noise, automatic fire, explosions, screams. The floor trembled faintly from subsonic speakers. The soldiers froze. Confusion rippled. Continue, Andrews barked. Let's see how your focus holds, Lieutenant. Alina's pulse spiked, but she didn't hesitate. Team, maintain sectors. Move on instinct, not noise. She adjusted their formation, guiding them through the storm of light and sound. A sudden burst of motion. Two instructors rushed them from opposite sides. She intercepted one mid-charge, turning his weight against him, dropping him before his partner could reach her. Focus, she shouted. Feel, don't think. Within moments, order returned to the chaos. Her soldiers began moving in rhythm again, trusting the flow instead of fighting it. When the alarms cut out, the silence that followed was deafening. Alina turned toward Andrews. His expression had changed, not approval, not yet, but surprise. That, she said, breathing hard, is the point, sir. When everything falls apart, training should hold you together. Andrews studied her a long time. Then he looked at the men on the floor, the analysts taking frantic notes, the silent audience of officers whose skepticism had turned to awe. Finally, he said, Lieutenant Torres, consider your methods validated. That evening, after the debrief, she walked alone along the Potomac. The city lights shimmered on the water like fire scattered across darkness. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something close to peace. Her phone buzzed. Incoming call, Sophia Torres. She answered, voice soft, Lola. Her grandmother's smile filled the screen. I saw the broadcast. Alina blinked. You watched it. Of course. Do you think the Pentagon can hide anything from grandmothers on Facebook? Alina laughed, quiet, tired, genuine. It went better than I expected. Sophia tilted her head. And how do you feel? Relieved, Alina said. Then after a pause, empty. Because the battle over? Sophia asked. Alina nodded. And I don't know what to do without one. Sophia's voice softened. Then maybe it's time to start building instead of fighting. Alina looked out at the dark water, wind tugging at her uniform collar. Building what? A future that doesn't need you to prove yourself anymore, her grandmother said. A world where the next girl who walks into that training yard won't be called princess. Alina swallowed hard. You think that's possible? Sophia smiled. Everything impossible starts with one person refusing to give up. They sat in silence, the sound of the river filling the space between them. 2 days later, back at Fort Carson, the news spread fast. Program approved. Combat Integration Initiative permanent. When she stepped onto the yard that morning, recruits were already training. The air was alive with motion, with purpose. Among them, new faces. Younger, some female, some barely out of boot camp, all moving through the same techniques that once made her an outcast. She walked the perimeter quietly, unseen by most, watching, listening. And then she heard it, a voice shouting from the mat. Focus, Torres method, flow, don't fight. She turned. The instructor was a young Marine sergeant, male, strong, confident, quoting her. The irony made her smile. Cooper appeared beside her, hands on his hips. Not bad for a so-called diversity hire. She laughed softly. Don't start. He grinned. I'm proud of you, Ranger. She turned toward him. You should be proud of us. You pushed me harder than anyone. I just showed you the edge, he said. You decided to jump. That night, Alina sat alone in her office, a space she'd never imagined having. On her desk lay a single photo, her grandmother in her youth wearing a worn uniform, rifle slung across her shoulder, eyes defiant. Next to it, the official commendation letter from the Department of Defense, framed in glass. Two worlds side by side, the jungle and the Pentagon, the past and the future. She whispered softly, "We did it, Lola." And for the first time, the word we felt bigger than family. It meant lineage. It meant every woman who'd ever been told she was too small, too soft, too late to make a difference. Outside, the wind rattled the flagpole. Somewhere across the yard, recruits shouted cadence into the night. Her name echoed faintly, not in mockery now, but in rhythm, in pride. She leaned back, closing her eyes, breathing slow. Her body still carried scars the public would never see, the bruises, the doubts, the nights of isolation. But she didn't need to hide them anymore. They were part of her strength now, invisible medals only she could feel. She thought of the colonel's applause, polite, political, and then of her grandmother's laughter, proud, free, honest. The difference between them was everything. In that moment, Alina understood something simple but profound. Real validation doesn't come from the top. It comes from within, from the silence after the storm, when the world finally catches up to the truth you've lived all along. The lamp flickered softly as she reached for her grandmother's notebook one more time. On the final page, under Sophia's handwriting, she added her own line. "Strength isn't what they give you permission to have. It's what you claim in silence and protect with honor." She closed the book, whispering into the dark. For every princess they mocked, for every ranger they never saw coming. And outside her window, the wind carried the sound of soldiers training, their shouts mingling with laughter, courage, and something new. Hope. Why did every compliment sound like a warning? 3 months after Washington, Lieutenant Alina Torres stepped off a C-17 transport into the blinding white glare of a desert runway. Heat shimmered over the tarmac. The air smelled of jet fuel and dust. Around her, the patchwork flags of a dozen nations snapped in the wind. Forward Operating Base Zaid, Coalition Training Mission. She'd been invited, ordered, really, to train a multinational special operations detachment. Rangers, Marines, British SAS, French commandos, even a small contingent of Middle Eastern partners. The first mixed branch, mixed nation program of its kind. Officially, she was here to standardize close quarters doctrine. Unofficially, everyone was watching to see if the Torres method worked outside American soil. As she walked toward the waiting convoy, cameras followed discreetly, Pentagon media liaisons in sunglasses, documenting everything. The success story had become a brand. She wasn't comfortable with it. The command tent was already full when she entered. Maps pinned to every wall, the hum of portable generators, sand scratching under boots. Colonel Hassan of the host nation greeted her with a firm handshake. "Lieutenant Torres," he said in perfect English, "your reputation precedes you." "I hope it doesn't get in the way," she replied. A few officers chuckled politely, others didn't. At the far table sat Major Vance, U.S. Marine liaison. Big frame, buzz cut, sharp eyes. He fought in 2 wars and looked like he missed them. He gave her a look halfway between appraisal and skepticism. "So this is the famous Ranger Princess," he said. "Not cruel but careless." Alina met his gaze. "Just Torres will do, sir." He smirked. "We'll see what you can do in a real dust bowl." Colonel Hassan cleared his throat. "Major Vance will be your operations partner. You'll design and lead combined exercises. My men respect skill. Earn that and the rest follows." "Understood," she said. The first week was chaos. Language barriers, conflicting tactics, clashing egos. Every briefing ended in debate. Every demonstration began with hesitation. Alina didn't shout, she adapted. She simplified commands into gestures. She let her movements speak louder than rank. At first they mimicked her reluctantly, then accurately, then naturally. During drills, she noticed the same pattern she'd seen years ago at Fort Carson. Disbelief giving way to curiosity, curiosity hardening into respect. Still, Major Vance remained unmoved. He followed her with crossed arms and an expression that said, "Prove it." One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session, he stopped her outside the training yard. "You ever wonder," he asked, "if all this mindfulness and flow stuff falls apart when bullets start flying?" She wiped sweat from her brow. "It doesn't fall apart, Major. It keeps people from falling apart." He studied her. "You talk like a philosopher." She shrugged. "Only because I've buried enough fighters to know philosophy's cheaper than regret." For a moment his hard mask cracked. Then he nodded once and walked away. 2 weeks later came the field evaluation, a live-fire hostage rescue exercise in a mock desert village built from sun-bleached concrete and metal shipping containers. 50 observers watched from a ridge above, among them foreign generals and media officials. Alina and Vance would co-lead the assault. 10 operators, simulated hostiles, real pressure. She briefed the team under the burning sun. "This isn't about killing targets, it's about control. We move as one. We watch each other's backs. We listen. Understood?" They nodded, even Vance. The siren sounded. They moved in, shadows through dust, cutting corners, stacking at doorways. Her breathing synced with the rhythm of footsteps. In that haze of noise and adrenaline she felt something pure, focus without fear. First contact, 2 hostiles in the courtyard, neutralized cleanly. They advanced through alleys narrow as tunnels, sunlight slicing in thin blades. At the second objective the radio crackled, "Blue 2 down, left flank pinned." Vance swore, "We'll lose time." Alina interrupted, calm but sharp, "No, we won't. You cover fire, I'll move." Before he could argue, she was already sprinting through debris, low and fast. Bullets tore dust from walls. She reached the fallen operator, pulled him behind cover, assessed quickly, minor shrapnel. Alive. "Stay down," she ordered. "You're done for this run." Then she turned back toward the noise. One of the hostiles had repositioned behind a stairwell, hidden, waiting. She spotted the glint of metal just before he fired. She dove, rolled, came up inside his blind spot, disarmed him with a twist and takedown so fluid it looked rehearsed. The observers above gasped audibly. When she returned to the squad, Vance just stared at her, jaw tight. "You done showing off?" She handed him the enemy's rifle, safety engaged. "Next time, you can do the running." He couldn't help the grin that cracked across his face. Fair. By sunset, the exercise was complete. 0 casualties. All objectives cleared in record time. The ridge erupted in applause, genuine this time. Even the general stood. Colonel Hassan approached her afterward, expression warm. "Your calm kept them alive, Lieutenant. Perhaps that is your real weapon." She smiled faintly. "It's what my grandmother taught me." "Then she must be a warrior." "She is," Alina said quietly. "She just fought different wars." That night's celebration rippled through the base. Laughter, music, the smell of spiced lamb from the mess hall. Alina slipped away to the perimeter wall, needing quiet. Vance found her there, 2 cups of thick Arabic coffee in hand. "Figured you'd be out here," he said, offering one. "You don't like parties, do you?" "Too loud," she admitted. "Noise makes me forget what matters." He leaned against the wall beside her. "You proved me wrong today." She looked at him. "About what?" "That compassion doesn't belong in combat." Alina took a slow sip. "Compassion's the only thing that survives it." They stood there for a long time, the desert wind tugging at their uniforms, stars bleeding across the sky. 2 days later, word came from Washington. TORRES method, to be adopted in multinational training doctrine. But before the ink could dry, tragedy struck. A patrol outside the base, local forces she'd trained, was ambushed. 3 killed, 2 captured. The survivors stumbled back, shaken, one clutching a blood-stained patch that bore her program's insignia. It wasn't just loss, it was personal. In the debrief, voices rose. Some blamed faulty intel. Others whispered about overconfidence, about soldiers relying too much on hand-to-hand doctrine in a live-fire zone. Alina sat silent while they argued. When the room emptied, she stayed. Vance approached quietly. "You're blaming yourself." "They were mine," she said. "They made their own choices." She shook her head. "Leadership doesn't stop where the bullets start." He hesitated, then asked, "What would your grandmother tell you right now?" Alina's throat tightened. "That loss is the price of teaching. Every lesson costs something." He nodded slowly. "Then make it worth what it cost." That night she walked to the small chapel near the airstrip, canvas walls, a single flickering lamp. She knelt not to pray but to listen. The silence there was different, thicker, alive. She whispered, "They died believing in what I taught them. I hope that was enough." The wind outside shifted, flapping the canvas softly, like a quiet reply. A week later, the coalition held a memorial on the flight line. Rows of helmets and rifles stood in the sand, tags gleaming in the sun. Alina stood at attention beside Colonel Hassan, her heart a steady ache. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped to the microphone, voice low but carrying. "They say training ends when the mission begins. I don't believe that. Training lives on in every decision we make, every breath we take under fire. These men didn't die because they were unprepared. They died because courage never guarantees survival. It only guarantees meaning." She paused, eyes sweeping the formation. "If what we teach doesn't save everyone, that doesn't mean it failed. It means we keep teaching. We keep learning. Because the moment we stop, the fallen truly are gone." When she finished, no one clapped. The silence itself was the salute. That evening she called Sophia again. The video flickered, the old woman wrapped in a shawl, eyes full of the same strength that had carried generations. "I heard," Sophia said softly. Alina nodded. "3 of them, they were so young." Sophia's voice trembled but didn't break. "Then honor them by living, by teaching better, by remembering that even the smallest act of kindness on a battlefield is victory." Alina's eyes burned. "Lola, I don't know if I can keep doing this." Sophia smiled gently. "Then rest, and when you rise, do it again, because warriors are not built in victory, they're built in heartbreak." The call ended. The screen went dark, but her grandmother's words lingered, heavy and alive. The next morning before sunrise, Alina walked to the training yard alone. The air was cool, the sand still damp with dew. She began to move, slow forms, measured strikes. Each motion a promise, to learn, to protect, to endure. From the shadows near the hangar, Vance watched silently. When she finished, he approached. "Orders came in," he said. "You're heading home next week." She nodded, breath steady. "And you?" "Staying, someone. Gotta keep them from getting lazy." She smiled faintly. "Good luck." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "You changed this place, Tors. Don't forget that." She shook his hand firmly. "None of us should." As he walked away, the first light broke over the horizon, washing the desert gold. She closed her eyes, letting warmth settle over her bruised heart. In war, victories fade fast. Names get lost. Programs change. But somewhere between pain and purpose, she'd found something unshakable. Not the need to prove herself. Not the glory of recognition. Just the quiet knowledge that what she'd built mattered. And in that silence, between the echo of gunfire and the hum of the morning wind, Alina Tors finally understood her grandmother's final lesson. Strength is not what survives the fire. Strength is the fire. Why did peace feel louder than war? The plane banked over Colorado at dawn. Below, the Rockies were dusted in snow, ridges catching the first light. Alina watched through the small oval window, hands folded, eyes heavy. It had been 10 months since she'd left the desert. 10 months since she'd watched young soldiers lower 3 helmets into sand. The seatbelt light blinked off. She didn't move. Somewhere behind her, a baby laughed. The sound startled her more than gunfire would have. When the aircraft finally touched down, she waited until everyone else had disembarked before rising. No applause, no salutes, just the dull scrape of boots on metal stairs and the smell of cold air that carried memory like dust. She was home, and she didn't know what that meant anymore. Fort Carson looked the same, but she didn't. New faces filled the training yard, eager, loud, alive. They moved with the unbroken confidence of people who hadn't yet buried a friend. Alina watched them from the edge of the field, unseen, her uniform clean but faded at the seams. Major Cooper spotted her first. He hadn't changed much, same rough grin, same eyes that could read her without words. "Well, look who survived diplomacy," he said, walking up with a grin. She smiled weakly, barely. He studied her a moment. "You look tired." "Just learning what peace costs," she said quietly. He didn't push, he never did. They walked the perimeter together, the sound of recruits shouting cadence echoing off the buildings. At one corner of the yard stood a new sign, freshly painted. TORRES, Combat Integration Center. Alina stopped. "You named it after me." "Didn't have a choice," Cooper said. "Command insisted, said you're a symbol now." She stared at the sign, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. "Symbols don't bleed." "No," he said softly, "but people remember them." That night in her new office, she unpacked the small wooden box she'd carried through every deployment. Inside, her grandmother's notebook, a dog tag from the desert, and a folded photograph of her first platoon. She set them carefully on the desk. For hours she sat in silence, listening to the wind press against the windows. The clock ticked. The base outside quieted. Then a knock. A young sergeant stepped in, nervous, posture stiff. "Ma'am, sorry to interrupt. I'm Sergeant Owens. I just wanted to say your training saved my brother in Afghanistan." Alina looked up, startled. "Your brother?" "Yes, ma'am. He said one of your graduates taught him the flow technique. He used it when their convoy got ambushed. Said it bought them time." Her throat tightened. "Is he okay?" Owens smiled faintly. "He's home just like you." After he left, she sat still, the silence now heavier but warmer. For the first time in months, she let herself cry, not from sorrow but from relief. Weeks passed. She rebuilt routines, morning runs, debriefs, new recruits, teaching again. But something inside her had shifted. She didn't bark orders now. She spoke quietly, watched more closely, corrected with patience rather than pride. One afternoon, she found a recruit crying behind the bleachers. Private Miller, barely 20. First week in training. First time away from home. "What's wrong?" Alina asked gently. Miller wiped his eyes. "They call me Princess, ma'am, because I'm slow, because I froze during drills." The word hit like a ghost from the past. Princess. Alina crouched beside her. "Do you know why they call people that?" Miller shook her head. "Because they're afraid," Alina said softly. "Afraid of what strength looks like before it hardens. Afraid of what they don't understand yet. I was called that too." Miller looked up, eyes wide. "You?" "Oh, many times," she said with a small smile. "They stopped after the 7th Marine." The girl's laugh broke through her tears. Alina handed her a towel. "Tomorrow, you'll show them what a princess can do." But at night, the ghosts came back. The dreams weren't cinematic. They were fragmented, sand, blood, laughter cut short, the static hum of a dead radio. She'd wake with her heart racing, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Then she'd sit on the edge of the bed, waiting for the quiet to settle again. Some mornings she walked before sunrise, boots crunching frost. She'd stop by the memorial wall near the flagpole, where the names of fallen soldiers were etched in stone. Underneath the latest edition, someone had placed 3 small stones in a row, the men lost in the desert. She traced their initials with her glove. "Still teaching me?" she whispered. A few months later, she was invited to speak at the academy graduation. The email said inspirational address. She almost declined, but Sophia's words echoed in her memory, honor them by living. The auditorium was packed. Hundreds of cadets sat in pressed uniforms, faces bright, restless with ambition. When Alina took the stage, she paused before speaking. She didn't look like the polished officers beside her jacket worn at the cuffs, her hair tied back simply. She began quietly. I used to think strength was about proving people wrong. The room stilled. It isn't, she continued. It's about proving yourself right, especially when no one else believes it yet, when they call you names, when they tell you you're not built for this, when they laugh. Her voice trembled slightly. She didn't hide it. I was called princess. It was meant to break me, but it reminded me of my grandmother, who fought in wars with nothing but courage and bare hands. So I carried the word like armor, and when the moment came, I let it define me my way. A faint smile touched her lips. Because sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't argue, it just acts. When she finished, the audience rose to its feet, not with thunderous applause, but with slow, respectful clapping that grew like a heartbeat. She bowed her head once deeply and stepped away. That night, she returned home to her grandmother's small house outside Pueblo. The porch light still flickered the same way it always had. The door opened before she could knock. Sophia stood there, older, smaller, but eyes bright as ever. You finally made it back. Alina smiled. You kept the light on. For warriors, Sophia said, the light never goes out. They embraced, long, wordless, everything unspoken passing between them. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and jasmine tea. The walls were covered in photographs, generations of soldiers, nurses, and farmers, lives built on resilience. Over dinner, Sophia listened more than she spoke. When Alina finished describing the desert, the memorial, the young recruit, her grandmother reached across the table and held her hand. You've seen too much loss for one life, Sophia said softly, but you've also given back more than most people ever will. Alina looked down. I don't feel like a hero. Good, Sophia said with a faint smile. Heroes are loud, you're something rarer. Later, they sat outside under a cold, clear sky. The stars felt closer here, the air thinner. Crickets sang. The hum of a passing freight train echoed in the distance. Sophia poured 2 cups of tea. Do you ever miss it, the fight? Alina took a long sip before answering. I miss the purpose, not the pain. Then find a new purpose, Sophia said simply. Teach them not how to fight, but how to heal. Alina turned toward her. Heal. You've already proven that war can be survived, Sophia said. Now show them how to survive themselves. Days turned into weeks. Alina stayed in Pueblo longer than planned. She helped her grandmother with chores, taught self-defense classes at the local community center, and began writing again. Lessons learned, failures, reflections. Not a manual, a story. Sometimes veterans would drop by unannounced. Word spread that Lieutenant Torres was back, that she listened without judgment. They talked about things the world didn't see, loneliness, guilt, the quiet ache of coming home. She never offered easy answers, just presence, the same steady silence that had once saved her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, she stood by the field behind her grandmother's house, the same one she'd trained in as a child. The wind moved through the grass like a whisper. Her phone buzzed, a message from Fort Carson. Requesting your return, advisory role, new recruits asking for you. She smiled faintly. The world still needed her, but this time she'd go back on her terms. She turned toward the house. Sophia was watching from the porch, a blanket over her shoulders. Back to the fight, her grandmother asked. Alina shook her head, back to the beginning. That night before bed, she opened her notebook. On the final page, under her grandmother's handwriting, she wrote, Strength is remembering who you are after the noise fades. Courage is teaching others before it begins again. She closed the book, placed it beside her on the nightstand, and whispered into the dark. For every soldier who comes home quiet, for every princess who never needed saving. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying her words somewhere far, where echoes never die. Why did endings never feel like endings? The bus from Pueblo rolled through the gates of Fort Carson just after dawn. The morning light stretched long and golden across the fields, dew glinting on the chain-link fences. Lieutenant Alina Torres sat by the window, duffel at her feet, watching recruits jog in formation. Their cadence echoed faintly, each voice full of the kind of fire that only youth carries. It felt like returning to a dream she'd already lived, but this time she wasn't the one running. She was the one they'd be running toward. The base had changed. New buildings, new banners. The Torres Combat Integration Center stood taller now, with murals along the walls, painted silhouettes of soldiers training together, men and women side by side. Her name was there, stenciled small in the corner, almost hidden in the paint. She liked it that way. When she stepped inside, the air was thick with energy, instructors barking orders, mats slapping under boots, laughter between drills. And there, at the center of it all, was Private Miller, no longer crying behind the bleachers, now leading a team through defensive transitions. Alina watched silently, pride swelling like a tide she didn't expect. Miller's voice carried clear and strong. "Flow, don't fight," she shouted. "Control before force." The recruits responded in unison, perfectly timed. Every motion looked familiar, precise, efficient, hers. Alina smiled. The fire's alive. "Lieutenant Torres," someone said behind her. She turned to see Captain Daniels, new command, mid-30s, professional calm in his eyes. "Welcome home, ma'am," he said. "We've been expecting you." "Am I late?" she asked. He shook his head. "Right on time. There's a new batch starting tomorrow. They've all heard the stories." She raised an eyebrow. "Stories?" Daniel smiled. "7 Marines, Pentagon, the desert. You're a legend, ma'am." She sighed softly. "Legends are just old mistakes told well." He chuckled. "Maybe, but mistakes don't inspire this much discipline." That evening she walked the training grounds alone. The wind moved through the flagpoles, a soft metallic hum. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played quietly, an old song, half static, half memory. She stopped near the obstacle course, the same one where years ago they'd laughed at her, called her princess. Now it stood under floodlights, silent, waiting. She climbed the first wall slowly, not out of need but remembrance. Her muscles still obeyed. Her breath came steady. At the top she paused, looking out across the base, the parade fields, the barracks, the endless horizon beyond. Somewhere in that distance were all the versions of herself she'd fought to become. The young cadet desperate to be taken seriously. The soldier broken and remade in fire. The woman who carried the ghosts of others so they could rest. She took a slow breath and whispered, "I made it, Lola." The night answered in silence, and somehow that was enough. The next morning she stood in front of 50 recruits, some barely 18, some already scarred by past tour. Her uniform was simple, her sleeves rolled up, no medals displayed. Only the patch on her shoulder, Ranger. She scanned their faces, nervous, curious, a few defiant, the same mixture she'd once worn herself. "Some of you heard my story," she began. "Forget it." They shifted uncertainly. "I'm not here to teach you how to fight," she said. "I'm here to teach you how to stay human while you do." A murmur ran through the group. She waited, then continued. "You'll learn to control your body, your fear, your anger. You'll fail more times than you think you can bear. And that's good, because the people who mock you for breaking are the ones who have never learned to bend." Her eyes moved across the crowd until they landed on a young woman at the back, dark hair tied tight, hands trembling slightly. Cadet Alina said, "Name." "Valdez, ma'am." "Why are you here, Valdez?" A pause to prove something. Alina nodded slowly. "To who?" The girl hesitated. "Everyone." Alina stepped closer. "Start by proving it to yourself. The rest will follow." Training began. Long days, short nights, repetition until exhaustion. Alina moved among them, correcting stances, softening aggression, sharpening focus. Her voice never rose. She didn't need it to. When she spoke, they listened. She saw herself reflected in all of them, every fear, every spark of pride, every stubborn refusal to quit. And she realized something she hadn't before. She wasn't their hero. She was their mirror. Weeks passed. One morning during a sparring drill, Valdez took a hit to the shoulder and fell hard. The others hesitated, unsure whether to stop or keep going. Alina stepped forward. "What are you waiting for?" Valdez gritted her teeth, pushed up on one arm and kept fighting, slower but precise. Her opponent, a heavier male recruit, overextended. She slipped under his guard and took him down cleanly. When the whistle blew, the room erupted. Valdez stood panting, arm bruised, eyes bright. Alina handed her a towel. "Good, what did you learn?" Valdez managed a shaky smile. "That I can take a hit." "No," Alina said softly, "that you can stand after taking one." That night, Captain Daniels joined her at the observation deck overlooking the yard. Below, the recruits were still training, long after curfew. "You built a culture," he said. "They don't stop because you don't." She watched quietly. "They'll stop when they learn the difference between strength and noise." Daniels looked at her. "And what's the difference?" She smiled faintly. "Strength lasts." He nodded, then hesitated. "We're recommending you for promotion, ma'am. Command wants you stateside, training doctrine development, permanent position." Alina exhaled slowly, behind a desk. "Yes, ma'am, safe, respected." She looked down at the field again, at the recruits moving like shadows in the floodlight. "I'll think about it," she said. But in her heart, she already knew the answer. A week later, she drove out past the edge of the base, where the mountains rose sharp and blue against the sky. The same place she used to run as a recruit. She stopped near a quiet ridge and sat on a rock, watching the valley below. Her phone buzzed, a message from Miller. "Ma'am, Valdez led the squad today. Perfect form. Said she learned it from watching you breathe before moving." Alina smiled, eyes soft. She typed a simple reply. "Tell her that's the point." She put the phone away and leaned back, letting the wind press against her face. The air smelled of pine and freedom. For once, she wasn't thinking about missions, politics, or ghosts, just the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She realized she wasn't running anymore. She was passing forward. Months later, she accepted the promotion, but on her terms. She split her time between D.C. and Fort Carson, writing doctrine, mentoring instructors, shaping a program that carried more than technique. It carried philosophy. One evening, during a symposium, she was asked a question by a journalist. "Lieutenant Torres, do you consider yourself a feminist symbol for the modern military?" She paused before answering. "I consider myself a soldier," she said quietly. "But if my existence makes it easier for someone else to be one too, then yes, I'll carry that symbol, as long as it helps them, not me." The audience applauded, but her eyes were distant, thoughtful. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was thinking of Valdez, of Miller, of the nameless soldiers still learning to breathe before moving. Years passed. The gray touched her hair early. The medals stayed in drawers. But her teachings lived on in training manuals, in videos, in whispered advice passed between recruits before dawn. Sometimes, walking through bases she'd never served on, she'd hear it. "Flow, don't fight. Control before force. Focus, feel, move." The words had outlived her name, and that was how she wanted it. One summer evening, she returned to Pueblo. Sophia's house stood empty now but cared for. The neighbors had kept the porch light burning, just as Sophia once did. Alina sat on the steps, notebook in hand, the same one that had crossed battlefields and continents. The pages were filled now, lessons, stories, regrets, hopes. On the last blank page she wrote, "They called me princess because they didn't see the ranger yet. They saw a woman where they expected weakness. But what they forgot is that strength wears many faces, and some of them smile before they strike." She set down the pen and closed the notebook. The sound of crickets filled the night, soft and endless. Later, under the wide Colorado sky, she walked toward the field where she'd once trained barefoot as a child. The grass brushed against her hands. She knelt, pressed her palm to the soil, and whispered, "For every soldier who learned to stand again. For every voice that refused to go silent. For every princess they mocked. And every ranger she became." The wind rose, carrying her words into the dark. Back at Fort Carson, the recruits still trained long after sunset. Their silhouettes moved in rhythm, fluid and fearless. Among them, a young girl, strong, fast, focused, finished her final drill and looked toward the empty observation deck. No instructor stood there, but she saluted anyway, because she knew who had built this place. And she knew the story. And somewhere in that unseen distance, in every heartbeat that refused to quit, in every soldier who learned that dignity doesn't need to shout, Alina Torres lived on. Not as a myth, not as a hero, but as proof that sometimes strength doesn't roar. It breathes, it endures, it teaches, and sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.